Okay, about to go live. And we're good. Let's see. Hey, folks. Wait, sorry, let me just make sure. Okay, about to go live. Okay, cool. Hey, all. Thank you for joining us yet again. We've had a bit of a little hiatus for the summer, but now we're back and we'll be continuing on for the rest of the year with these awesome talks. So I'll just get right into it. So what we have here is this is going to be so, I don't want to say action-packed, but we have Santiago Siri here from Democracy on Earth, who is and has been involved in the space for a very long time and is just part of a number of very cool projects that I think will be very interesting to hear about, especially when you think about the conjunction of all of them together. So Santiago, I don't know if you want to just do a quick introduction.
Yes, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Santiago Siri. I'm currently based in Madrid, Spain, but I'm originally from Buenos Aires, Argentina. In the last 10 years, I've been involved in the crypto ecosystem. Like everyone, I got started intrigued by Bitcoin. I come from Latin America, where the economic reality of my country faces a lot of challenges that are very common to everyone, with like high inflation and the lack of the ability to buy US dollars. So that led to Bitcoin becoming an interesting proposition in a context like that. I've been involved in efforts to try to connect how we can use this same technology to improve our governance, our institutions, our democracy. Back in 2012, I started a political party in Argentina called Partido de la Red, which was a political party that proposed candidates that would vote every law according to what people told them how to vote online. And that led to researching digital democracy. I left the country in 2015 to work on a foundation called Democracy Earth Foundation, where we have been researching technology for democracy over the last 7 years, implementing pilots around the world. And more recently, we have focused our efforts in a project called Proof of Humanity, which is a protocol that grants human rights using these same networks, smart contracts and Ethereum, which opens up very interesting possibilities on how to use the blockchain for social good.
Awesome, yeah. And you raised an interesting point right there, just in terms of, government issues. And I think, especially with everything you're involved in, there's an overarching idea or theme, which is governance. And when you think about, when people who are not deeply involved in the space think about what's happening, they think of, crypto trading, or maybe even the, some of the practical aspects, like on the more database side. But people are largely missing one of the most important things happening in the space right now, which is kind of revamping and kind of revolutionizing governance and what it looks like and how it works. So thinking of that, especially with your background in politics and political science, for example, how did you go from, say, Partido de Red, which is Spanish for network party, right? How did that bring you into, starting with Democracy Earth?
So when we first started trying to explore the idea of what would it take to make a democracy over the internet that allows for anyone to participate, that it's a fair vote, that it's one person, one vote. It looks simpler than it actually is to make a voting system. You will assume that if you have a digital election, then you somehow prove the citizenship of a person, and then somehow that person is able to vote online. But it turns out that when you look into that challenge, there are many, many hurdles that help differentiate between making a poll, a simple survey, versus making something that has all of the check marks and all of the security that is required for a legitimate election. And it led to discovering that it's a very interesting technological problem. It's not just making a piece of software and hoping it works. When we think about how to do governance in digital space, you need to make sure that you are able to make a system that false identities won't take over. You need to make a system where no one has duplicate identities or more voting power than they should. Who controls the access to the servers, or who controls what gets written on a database really matters, because if it's a high stakes election, then certainly people that have special rights or super users will try to tamper with the election. So when we started the Partido de la Red, we were obviously very intrigued with the idea of using technology to improve democracy, but the technology just wasn't there. We figured, well, maybe doing open source software, or maybe using certain type of cryptography. But the fact is that Bitcoin was barely beginning 10 years ago. 2012, it was very much the early days of Bitcoin itself. And the rise of decentralized networks that can help secure a transaction or a vote cryptographically were also barely beginning. And Ethereum, which is a second generation blockchain that emerged in 2015, that got activated in 2015, today is the largest blockchain running smart contracts, was a very nascent and new idea. It still is, actually. This is like, we're talking about something that was created or activated 7 years ago. And as we saw the evolution of the technology around us to build institutional technology, to build tools that could enable identity or could enable democracy in a secure way, we began focusing our efforts, researching and looking into that. And it's clear to me that our goal as an organization with Democracy Earth is to understand what democracy is in the information age. And in order to do that, we need to build technology that is obviously open source, meaning that anyone can audit and contribute to the code. There's no copyright or property laws. Then that it's something that can run over censorship-resistant networks, something that is able to prevent censorship from a nation state or from a corporation. So in that regard, networks like Ethereum that run with decentralized protocols are a big plus. Like, we couldn't, relying on a server or relying on a centralized form of authority simply means that authority could tamper with the rules of an election. And last but not least, making sure that whatever technology we build is accessible, meaning that it's freely available, and anyone can implement it anywhere there's an internet connection. So I started exploring the world of politics in Buenos Aires, Argentina, but I'm a technologist at heart. So this area of technology and politics or crypto is a good intersection of the kinds of minds and talents that we need to in order to figure out digital democracy or digital identity under a new light.
I love that. Just the idea of digital democracy sounds really beautiful, and just like you said, it's these decentralized technologies that are really going to bring that out and make that possible, especially the censorship resistance aspect of it, because that's pretty much the most, if it's one of the most, if not the most important aspect of these technologies to begin with, because as we all know, in this part of the world, issues like that can occur in terms of tampering and whatnot. So having this kind of technology is going to be really amazing for a lot of people. Now, I love the idea of, and you mentioned proof of humanity, which kind of aligns the decentralized identity aspect. And obviously there are different kinds, and proof of humanity is one of the newer ones and one that you've worked on directly for a little while. So yeah, tell us about that, and tell us how that kind of, I guess, why decentralized identity is important to begin with, and then how that kind of works.
Well, if you look at the history of democracy in the recent years, and especially if you put your eye on the United States, for example, it's clear that a huge vector of influence has been social media, and specifically, if you look at you can look at the Obama elections and you can look at the Donald Trump election. Facebook has played a preponderant role on this, helping shape the opinion or the minds of the voters in those elections. And the reason for that is that most of our interactions on the internet, or where we get our source of information today, is done through a kind of network like Facebook, whether it's Facebook itself or WhatsApp or Instagram or Google or Twitter. The main thing that these networks have in common is that they are basically repositories of identity. Like Facebook is the largest centralized repository of identity, and because it's a centralized corporation, in order to remain relevant, they have to basically make sure they are aware of every step we make on a daily basis. So it has become these modern tools of surveillance that, in order to become more profitable and be able to, deliver a free service to the consumers, their advertising model led to a state of affairs where the data of these networks is incredibly valuable to those in power and to those who are running for office, not only in America but anywhere around the world. So who controls our identity, and what rights and what access and what possibilities come from the ability of monopolizing human identity is a very important question. That speaks at the core of human rights, or at the core of who we are as what it means to be a citizen in a society. So when we implemented our own pilots, or democratic pilots around the world, a couple of times it was clear that a very common attack we would suffer is by organizations that try to do a civil attack, which is what it's known in the world of technology or crypto as a way of, it's an identity pretending to be multiple identities. And that, that kind of attack comes from making systems where, if you don't have accountability to how an identity has been generated, if you cannot audit how an identity is created or how an identity is rejected in a system in an open way, then whoever controls the database, whoever controls the identities, pretty much in the same way that happens with Facebook or with Google in the Western world, will have absolute power over the outcome of an election or a digital vote. So it became very clear in our line of research that focus on identity was critical. Like, it's the Achilles heel to get things right that would unlock the real possibilities of using blockchain-based technology for democracy or for all kinds of social applications that we can imagine once we figure the identity primitive out. So Proof of Humanity is a project that tries to do that, to decentralize identity. And it does so by, you have to generate a proof of yourself. You have to do it through an Ethereum wallet that you have sovereign control yourself and no one else. You have to demonstrate that you control that wallet by making a transaction that uses a public address that is present on a video that you make about yourself. And then there are social and economic incentives in the system that, if you go through the process of doing a proof the right way and you don't get challenged, then you are recognized as a verified human being on the registry of humans that we are creating on the blockchain. And that registry of humans, if we are able to successfully make it in a decentralized way, without duplicates, without robots or deepfakes or identities that are not necessarily human or AIs or bots, if we're able to avoid that noise and make sure we can make a list of humans in a decentralized way, then digital democracy, universal basic income, new forms of credit, a lot of social applications can be unlocked, and that will help make the blockchain a technology that can dare more than just financial opportunities. Right? It could be a technology that can address welfare or can address society at large.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's key, because right now, like I said earlier, everyone just thinks of it in terms of finance or financial aspects, but we could go so far beyond that. And proof of humanity is interesting. And you also did a talk at HCC, the conference, and for the audience, I'll probably put that link somewhere, either in the podcast version or whatever. But that was excellent. You kind of showed how it works, how many people are already using it, which is crazy. And just the idea, especially even in terms of, for local governments, for local voting system, that would be such a great use case, because then, like you said, it's completely decentralized, and it's for a system where you need to see who everyone is. So then there's no issue with that, and no one can hide, no one can kind of spoof the system, which is what like a Sybil attack is. So that's really cool. And again, on this voting part, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, there's a bounty on every to find fake identities. If you are able to effectively identify a duplicate or a false identity on the registry of proof of humanity, there's a bunch of ETH that you can win by successfully identifying a duplicate. So that's how the system makes sure that it has incentives to keep a clean list of human beings without errors.
No, it's excellent. And that's the beauty of decentralized systems and open source systems, that pretty much anyone can improve it, and pretty much anyone can make sure that there are no bugs or no errors and whatnot. So that these are systems that just build upon themselves and improve themselves. And like as was said, you could use this for voting, for example. But I kind of want to touch on as well another kind of voting, which is blockchain based voting. One of which is what they call quadratic voting. I guess if you could quickly explain that and kind of just show the how powerful this kind of this option for voting style is.
So one of the interesting things about how we can do governance once we sort out the issue of identity is that we can go way beyond the traditional first past the post voting democracy. One of the models is doing quadratic voting, like you mentioned. Quadratic voting is an interesting novel idea where someone can has a credit of votes, and you can allocate those votes to different issues. And the more votes you give to a specific issue, the cost in credit will increase quadratically. So you as a voter are faced with the challenge of either putting all of your voting strength on the ideas you care about, or distributing your voting power across multiple ideas. And we have actually done the first official pilot in the United States on quadratic voting back in 2019. And we did it in a way that allowed for the Congress of the state of Colorado to decide how to prioritize 120 different projects that they were going to be introducing to the State House. These ideas are obviously, game theoretically, are very novel, but in order to correctly implement them, is obviously the best way to do it is with digital technology. To do quadratic voting without software is pretty hard. It can be done, but it's not as easy as you would be able to do it with a good user interface or with a simple tool that would abstract away a lot of the challenges of doing that. And
it's not scalable at all.
Yeah, and so with proof of humanity, we have one of the primitives, which is identity, and with identity, we can start building on top of Ethereum different models of governance. And we actually have a couple of DAOs. DAOs are distributed autonomous organizations that have different models of governance. And if you use proof of humanity, you can be assured that you won't have duplicate identities, so you can implement good mechanisms on governance.
Yeah, and that way you can pretty much always trust that, you know, what people said they voted for is actually what is in the system. You don't have to worry about particular, again, people putting in the wrong things, people, just general corruption, really, that would go a long way to minimize that at the very least. But no, I think that's really interesting. And I think any kind of implementation of that is going to be just an easier form of democracy at the end of the day, because everyone's different. Everyone has different goals and desires. They may vote for someone based on very different things, very different aspects of who they are, what they really care about. And the cool thing about quadratic voting is that you can take specific, you can, like, you know, whether one candidate has 5 different things they're very strong on or they care about, and you can kind of vote based on what those things are. So whether it's economic, whether it's social, what have you, you can kind of push your votes or push your credits onto those specific issues, so that you have more of a voice on some things, or at least the things that you care about the most. I think, I'm not totally sure, but I think I saw there was a recent vote in New York that seemed to use quadratic voting. I'm not sure if that for sure was the case. I don't know if you saw that.
I haven't seen that, but yeah, it's, you know, on Ethereum, I think you see multiple experiments on governance from all kinds of protocols that are trying to bring more participation, more legitimacy, more intelligence into the decisions being made. For example, on Proof of Humanity itself, we have our own DAO, our own distributed organization that governs over the protocol. We actually have 2 DAOs. One is a DAO built for the governance of Proof of Humanity, and another one built for the governance of the Universal Basic Income Token. With the Proof of Humanity DAO, we have 1 person, 1 vote, but it uses liquid democracy, so you can delegate your vote to someone else. And with the UBI DAO, we have actually implemented quadratic voting. So you vote with your balance of UBI tokens, but it will be the square root of that. So this caps the influence of whales, of large holders, and keeps the small holders as relevant as well into the tallying of the vote at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I mean, that's interesting too, because anytime you insert some kind of, I don't want to use the word money, but maybe token aspect or credit aspect, there is always the issue of potentially people with more money or more of whatever the asset is or what have you, being able to have more of a say and kind of overpower the ones with less. So I think this way you can kind of make sure that that doesn't happen, and make sure that, you know, with whoever you are, you still have the same amount of say, or the voice is the same. And I think that'll be, and for DAOs and for any kind of other organizations or you know, any other kind of governance systems, that aspect, the quadratic voting, the proof of humanity, that's going to be key, because it solves so many problems. And like you said, proof of humanity is pretty much just a primitive that you can build and create so many different things with. And just like that, as you mentioned, there's also the universal basic income aspect, which is separate to voting, but is still something that's incredibly important, incredibly valuable, and something that these systems can actually activate and use. And you've already pushed this project and it's already been doing so well. But I know it's a bit complex. So I would definitely like you to, you know, take a little bit of time and kind of walk us through that and how it works.
Yeah, I can make you a quick demo if you're okay with that. I can show you a little bit of how Proof of Humanity works. So let me see if I can share my screen.
Let me know.
I don't have a screen sharing enabled. I don't know if you need to give me access to that or.
Okay, it should be now.
Okay, so this is Proof of Humanity. If you actually go to the website and you click on, you go proofofhumanity.id, and you click, you will see a brief landing showing the details of the protocol. But if you click on Start, it will take you here to the registry of humans. These are the last registrations we had on the system. You can filter the registrations according to the current phase. And for example, if let's look for Vitalik, for example, he's on the registry. Here you can see that Vitalik has done his proof. Each proof consists of a video of yourself claiming that you are a real human and do not have a registry in this register.
I certify that I am a real human and that I am not already registered in this registry.
So this is Vitalik. You can see on the video that he's showing an address of his Ethereum address. Right. This address needs to coincide with the address that is going to be used for the transaction. So we are sure that Vitalik is actually using an address he controls. The next step is that you need to get a vouch by someone else. Someone needs to vouch for you on the system, and you need to pay for a deposit. You can either get crowdfunding for that deposit. There's a crowdfunding mechanism, or you just pay the deposit, which right now is 0.12 ETH. We're looking into ways into making it more accessible, but you will recover this deposit back if you successfully complete the proof. Once you pay the deposit, uploaded the proof, and you get a vouch, there's a window of time of 3.5 days where someone can challenge your identity. So if I filter identities by those that have been challenged, right now we have 2 challenge registrations. They probably made some mistake in the process, and they're going through a dispute. This person, I think, like I can already tell the problem, is showing the address backwards, so it's not clear on the video. So if you get challenged, you go through what is called an arbitration court, where you have to either defend your position or whoever has been able to find a challenge profile will earn a part of the deposit that has been paid. To resolve disputes, we use Kleros, which is this arbitration system, also built on the blockchain, where you have multiple rounds of appeals. The losing side, the cost to appeal for the losing side grows on each step if you want to keep on appealing. And you have a set of jurors that will have to vote whether or not that registration met the guidelines or not. So you can browse around, you can look at the many profiles in the registry. We have roughly 8,500 profiles right now. Like I mentioned before, if you want to see what the community is debating in order to improve the protocol, you can always go to gov.proofofhumanity.id. You will find multiple debates about different aspects. And on Snapshot, which is the system that we use to vote, there's the Proof of Humanity profile on Snapshot, where we're voting multiple decisions, which is also a very interesting way of engaging and participating in the experiment yourself.
That's amazing. So in that situation where she was challenged, most likely because of just a video submission issue, she could go through that process. But the assumption, I assume, is that when she can get through that and maybe redo it, she would be able to get in with no problem.
Yeah. If you go through the registration process with OK, it's good to always, we have a Telegram channel. So that's @ProofHumanity on Telegram. You can on Telegram make sure that you can ask to other members of the community to check your profile, to check your video if you want to be extra sure, and you will get good advice from the community there. We have learned a lot throughout the process. Of the 8,500 or so identities, only 500 got challenged. So we are always looking into ways of making sure that the process is as easy as possible for the new users. Crypto is very new. Everyone, we have onboarded a lot of new users to Ethereum itself. But it's interesting. I think there's this incentive at the end of the line of the universal basic income scheme that we are working on, and that's a really exciting thing for people that onboard this, because they're able to be a proof of humanity, an alternative to the pension system they have with the government in their local countries, or an alternative source of income that can be used to fund their studies or stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and just, I think, for the audience, just to kind of set the stage, I mean, the way that from the demo you showed, it seems that, you know, proof of humanity is already very robust. It seems very secure. And I know that'll just improve as it goes on, which is great, because then, you know, you kind of provide that assurance, that kind of trust in the system, you know, that you don't have to worry about hacking or security issues or anything like that. And it's interesting too. I do wonder, you know, because there's so many different parts. There's the Claros part, there's snapshot, there are all these different aspects that you can kind of go in it and start to use. How have you found that aspect for people to truly participate with more than just the video in terms of actual voting and things like that? I mean, an actual full participation. How have you found that process for people who aren't very new to the space and them just trying to figure out how to really be fully involved in the system?
Very early on, we found that engaged community. We actually have a very large community in Latin America because some of the founders come from there, even though it's a pretty international project. And one of the exciting things about building with these networks is that once you put a protocol out there and a token out there, people will just grab it and build stuff with it. And I think there was clearly a demand on the Ethereum ecosystem to at least have a primitive for verifying if an address is or not a human. There's a lot that can be done with that simple primitive that impacts the governance of other protocols, not just our own, or you know, dynamics to distribute tokens in a fair way. There are many use cases that I think we will see in the upcoming years. But very early on, we found ourselves with an engaged community that started building with it. For instance, with the Universal Basic Income token, in order to create mechanisms that help sustain its value, very early on, other communities like Wire, which is a community that has a set of smart contracts where you deposit funds and generate a yield with those funds. We are using those contracts to buy and burn UBI tokens with the yield. So we have a mechanism that brings a way of sustaining the token over the long term under a certain price floor. So all of those things emerge because of the ability that Ethereum has to do composability. You can mix one smart contract with another one in a permissionless way, and that's a very powerful resource. And also, I think that community is extremely important in these projects. There's no community behind a protocol or a token. It's very unlikely that it will get very far. So we do a strong, consistent effort on Telegram to have people there, on the forum that I just showed you on gov.proofofhumanity.id to debate the ideas. We use all the tools that we can find in the ecosystem that, you know, make the institutional possibility of making something like proof of humanity real, and that's one of the exciting things about the epoch or the period we are currently at with smart contracts and Ethereum itself.
Yeah, I love what you said about the community aspect, because above all, you could have all the tech in the world, but if you don't have that social layer, then you really can't do anything with it. You can't get far, because you need humans at the end of the day to actually be a part of the systems and not to actually participate. So that's excellent. And I think I'm just really stuck on the UBI project, because UBI itself is such a huge goal, right? And especially the idea of before now, it's pretty much largely been talked about, and there have been a lot of smaller experiments and whatnot in many different countries, but of course it's always limited to one particular city or one particular country, maybe if it's a smaller country. But the idea of having UBI be global, accessible to potentially anyone, given, of course, you know, there's still a lot of people, billions of people without internet access and things like that. But as that improves, that could be something that anyone can access. And it's not tied to, say, a particular government, which, you know, when that happens, that could cause issues, or it's not tied to one company, for example, which also could cause massive issues. But it's just these cryptographic decentralized ecosystems that no one in particular runs. They're just people building on top of it. Yeah, and just the idea of that is massive, and it could help so many people. And I think just the continuance of that and the evolution of that will just provide so much value. Where do you see this going in the next, like, let's say 10 years?
Well, it's a huge challenge with UBI. This is one of the things that I spend my time thinking on a daily basis, how to make this token be something that can really provide a basic means of life for everyone that's onboarded on Proof of Humanity. And obviously, first of all, making a token is relatively easy, but making sure that it's a valuable token, then that's a whole different challenge. We have to build with the constraint that this token gets sent to every verified Proof of Humanity address every second, actually, like 0.00028 UBI per second gets streamed to all of the verified Proof of Humanity accounts, which is roughly 1 UBI per hour per human, 720 UBI per month, multiplied by all of the 10,000 humans that are in the registry almost. So with that issuance rate, how we can build mechanisms that sync the token and sync are able to capture value for the token. And this is funny because just last night, actually, Vitalik Buterin, he replied a tweet of mine, like suggesting that we figure out more and more mechanisms that can capture value for the token. So one thing that you can do with tokens is reduce the circulating supply of the token in the market. Just make sure that there are ways of burning tokens, which burning basically translates to sending the token to a 000 address no one can access to. So we have different mechanisms in place for that. We started doing liquidity pools that provided an incentive to those that contribute liquidity on Uniswap, which is a decentralized exchange where you can buy UBI tokens. That was a first step to generate a basic liquidity. Right now we have around $300,000 of liquidity in those contracts. We implemented the wire vaults that I mentioned before. You can access these on democracy.earth. These are vaults that you are exposed to Ether or DAI or whatever crypto asset, but right now we have with Ether and DAI. You remain exposed to that asset. We just generate some yield on top of it, some profit on top of it by blending it into the market. And with that yield, we get to buy and burn UBI tokens. So all of these mechanisms are the first ones that we have found out that are interesting. But obviously, there are challenges. If we want the vaults to be sustainable over the long term, we need to make sure they have sufficient liquidity to generate enough yield to sustain the value for 10,000 people, or in the future, if it's a million or a billion people, then the liquidity needs to grow accordingly. So these are basically just new doors or new paths that have been opened by smart contracts and Ethereum that we can begin exploring. And if we are successful at some of these experiments, then there's a feasible way to achieve universal basic income in a way that it's non-coercitive, not based on state money, by simply using right incentives and decentralized networks.
Voluntary UBI, which is pretty crazy. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's really the composability of all this that really makes it so robust and powerful, because just with this UBI project, you also have other aspects like liquidity pooling and yield farming, which is fully in the DeFi ecosystem, but they just all combine. And then the idea of streaming money is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, because it's like it's not one-to-one transactions. It's not one transaction after another. It's literally just a constant, continuous flow of funds that are going into a particular wallet or towards a particular person, which is just insane to think about. And I mean, and it never ends in the way of like the stream is continuous, but also in terms of more and more things will be built on top of these, where you can make not just one kind of economy, but economies on top of economies. Like, for example, if you have I don't know if this is possible with Proof of Humanity or UBI, but I don't know if you're familiar with splits by the Mirror protocol, where they basically.
I haven't heard of it.
Okay, yeah, I think you would really like that. It's basically splitting. They use like Merkle trees to kind of put multiple. It could just be even multiple wallets, but it's. I'll send you something. It's basically like you can. I'm not the best to explain it, but you can put multiple wallets together so that whenever someone's sending money to one person, it could actually send it to multiple people at the same time, or multiple organizations or multiple DAOs or what have you, to the point where you could probably eventually do UBI to everybody in the world, potentially from one transaction, which would be pretty crazy. But yeah, just the idea of combining all these different aspects and all these different technologies together to create this insane ecosystem is pretty cool. And I think what you're building with this, what you guys are working on, is just gonna change so many lives. And yeah, like you said, it was really after the invention of Ethereum and smart contracts and just this composability that we're really going to make a lot of changes, because Bitcoin was made for one thing, but now we have these kind of evolved infrastructures that are just going to do so much more for people. And I know you're not the biggest fan of Bitcoin, but it's just insane to see how these things are evolving in real time and how many people are working on these things every single day. Even things like, I don't know if you saw the Loop project, where literally every day something new is coming on top of it. So I think I really wish more people would pay attention to this ecosystem, to this industry, because it's every day there's something new, there's something mind-blowing. And actually, on that note, I do want to make sure. So if anyone's watching, if you have any questions, definitely just write it down. Let me see, I'm just looking at the comments. So yeah, so we have a great question here. And you kind of touched on this actually, but it's basically, what kind of precautions are there to combat deepfake tech being used to try to play the system?
Well, deepfake is definitely a vector of attack that we need to pay attention to. Right now, I would say that it's fairly easy to recognize a video deepfake, mainly because unless you are Tom Cruise, which means you have a lot of data of your face out there in the public, so I can train a neural network to create a reliable Tom Cruise face. The computation required, or the amount of data, more even than the computation itself, required to replicate the face of a standard human being or a not so public human being, it's enormous. Like it's not possible today. Or you would get a kind of deepfake that makes it easy recognizable that you are actually making a false identity. That said, we're actually talking with some organizations to create a bounty program that allows to pay a significant amount of money of whoever is able to inject a deepfake in the registry or generate a civil attack. So stay tuned to that. Pay attention to my Twitter account at Santi Siri. I'll be sharing news about that very soon. But yeah, the deepfake is definitely something to pay attention to. Any kind of centralizing force in the system needs to be debated by the community, and we need to make sure that this remains as a censorship-resistant, decentralized network. It's very important. If there's some some choke point of controlling the protocol, then we need to pay attention to that.
That's awesome. Yeah, and another point was raised about looking at IDs from different video styles of video cameras, and that reminds me of something you mentioned at your ETCC talk, where someone made a WhatsApp video, or video on WhatsApp, and then kind of decompressed it.
WhatsApp removes. We found out that WhatsApp removes 8 pixels. 4 pixels from each side of the video. We don't know why WhatsApp does that, which is very suspicious actually. But when you share a video over WhatsApp, it will no longer be 360 pixels wide. It will be 352 pixels wide. And we had a lot of malicious challengers attacking people for simply not meeting the minimal resolution. We require the videos to have a certain resolution because we want to make sure that it's visible enough to make sure that if there's a deep fake or someone with makeup or not. But because of this rule or this issue of WhatsApp, which we didn't know at the beginning, it required an upgrade to the protocol rules to lower the resolution requirements to 352. Until that didn't happen, we had, unfortunately, a lot of profiles getting rejected because of 8 pixels, which makes no sense to me. But because this is a decentralized system of arbitration and decision making, until we didn't change the rules and made it clear that 352 pixels were allowed, then these malicious challengers were operating. The interesting thing is that we were able to react as a community, to vote a proposal, to create the improvement, and to deploy it on the network, on the guidelines. But it's these things that are helping us understand the boundaries of these new institutional possibilities.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really cool to see, just the way that we're seeing these communities activate and come together to fix these problems and build these solutions in ways that weren't really, not to say they weren't possible or weren't the case, but it's just more of a, there's more of a drive. I guess there's more incentive too. But just watching all these communities to come together to build things is kind of, again, mind-blowing and amazing to see. And that's why all this technology is happening so fast. That's why everything's being built so fast and iterated so fast and improving so much. So yeah, that's extremely interesting. Let me just make sure there are no more questions. Yeah, I mean, this is just incredibly cool to see everything that's happening. And I'm so excited to what we see in the next few years, because every year is like a century basically in this space. So
yeah,
definitely gonna be following more. And for everyone watching, please. Sorry, say that again.
No, yeah, things move very fast.
Sorry.
Like Proof of Humanity has been existing for 6-7 months, and it feels like 7 years. Let me tell you that.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy to think about. Yeah, I mean, we could definitely close out, but maybe if there's anything, any last point that you want to mention? Sorry, I'm just realizing we have
a bit of a choppy connection. I hope you are listening to me. Maybe I can stop my video if that's better.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay.
Yeah.
Final thoughts. The best way to learn the technology is to use it. So I invite you all to check out Proof of Humanity, proofofhumanity.id. That's where you can begin learning about the project. There are a lot of articles. You can look us on Twitter at Proof of Humanity. Myself, I'm at Santi Siri. I talk about UBI and Proof of Humanity on a daily basis. We are trying to figure this all out as a community. We have people from all over the world chiming in and contributing to the project. And it's the very early days. We're talking about the protocol that has less than 1 year old. And we are discovering a lot of new things as we go on a daily basis. So it's an exciting project with a great community behind it. We're trying to figure out identity, democracy, universal basic income, a lot of very relevant social technologies for governance that I'm sure will make an impact in this century where the internet and cyberspace are pretty much taking over our lives and our reality in more and more ways.
Absolutely. I mean, and basically what we're trying to do at the end of the day is we're trying to make the world better. And this technology is such a huge part of that. There's so much potential for it. But Santiago, thank you so much. This has been awesome. For folks watching, we're going to be back to normal monthly talks. So stay tuned for, it'll either be end of this month or beginning of next. But thank you all for joining us. Take care.
Thank you, Stephen. See ya.
Bro, thank you so much, man. This was great.
A pleasure.